taking the stick as the basis, we do say this is our first term for the kids, you know, we're just toddlers in the class. So taking the idea of the stick, we then would have to use it. So we have the stick, and then what could the stick be? So you work on it as a process of free association. So the stick might be a sword, but as you're using it as a sword, it could also be a billiard cue. So trying to exercise your mind, if it's a billiard cue, it might then turn into a bow and arrow. And if it's a bow and arrow, you must take the gesture of the bow and arrow, not change it, but it could be an alternative one. So it's not only the bow and arrow, it could be somebody either waving, and if it's somebody waving, and then it could be perhaps a bird. And if it's a bird, it could be a butterfly. And if it's a butterfly, it could be also you're kind of making a cake. And as you're doing this, you're trying to, at the same time, think in terms of body association. And as you're doing this, and you don't know what to do, then that becomes the ball. And as it becomes the ball, you have to think it becomes something else. It may become a motorbike. As it becomes a motorbike, it becomes your rowing. So that's the kind of very simple exercise that we did. The rhythm of what we see naturalistically, we make people relook at people. Most interestingly, the way we see how it's influenced the world in terms of its fascination for younger people. All sorts of exercises have somehow got into the street. And so we see it in this place called the Centre Pompidou, where all these little children of these mime schools are all busy doing their thing. And then these, in turn, have spread around Europe. And then suddenly we see in New York breakdance. And breakdance, they use mime in breakdance, into eventually the moon dance of Michael Jackson, who's walking backwards. All these ideas, all this break, this kind of mime, the rap came from and originated from the experiments of Jean-Louis Barrault on a hot summer in a little atelier in Paris. And so what Lecoq showed you is that in any situation, everybody's alive and alert, and we had exercises to create that. So that's what he taught me, was the possibility and the potential of the ensemble. So one day I was reading Kafka's In the Penal Colony, which is a short story about a man who's executed by a machine. And it was such a bizarre story, so phenomenally creative. And I thought this would make a great drama. Just build your machine, and then you've got this, it was more, not a monologue, but a huge role for the commanding officer who believes in capital punishment. I thought this was a great curtain raiser for my lifelong ambition, which was to stage Kafka's Metamorphosis. So my first big or largest production was one of the most eccentric, exotic, bizarre, surrealistic, manic, marvelous stories of all time. Kafka's Metamorphosis, about a man who changes into an insect. And how I staged it, I mean, I fortunately had a little bit of help, watching an amateur company do it to create the insect, and also studied mime. And this was like 1,000 light years away from the plays that the people were doing at the time, which were worthy plays, like, you know, Look Back in Anger and Arnold Wesker's Roots, and I'm talking about Jerusalem, and they're all good plays, John Arden and Edward Bond, but they were, to me, they belonged in a different realistic school of the here and now. But I wanted to have a theatre which was beyond the future and any time. So I decided, and I worked on Metamorphosis, and that was in '69, my production at the Roundhouse, huge success. And since then, I have never, ever, with only 2 exceptions, chosen to do in 50 years or 40 years, I've never done a play, except Oscar Wilde's Salome, which is more like a poem, which I did, funnily enough, in Ireland at the Gay Theatre. And many years before, I did an adaptation of Miss Julie by Strindberg. Well, I adapted it ruthlessly. Apart from that, I've always started to write my own plays. So in '75,
I wrote a prose poem type play, a punk play called East, and then I wrote West, and then I adapted Fall of the House of Usher, which I toured, and then I started to write, started to find myself as an author. So it all started that way. It started with the fact that there was nothing that remotely interested me in British drama.